Hey again, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Blessed Are the Binary Breakers. By now, you should know that I'm your host, Avery Smith. My partner made fun of me for always introducing myself as your host, but I figure that's what I am, right? In this episode, you'll get to hear from Adam Richards, who you already heard from if you listened to the episode on the United Methodist Church. In case you haven't been keeping tabs on what updates there have been from that general conference, the UMC voted to stick by the traditional plan, which is bad news for LGBTQ Methodists and their allies. It means that the Methodist Church will continue to say that LGBT plus folks cannot be ordained, cannot get married. But the incredible news is that there are so many Methodists who are fighting this decision, and I am so proud of them and wish them the best. And Adam Richards is another one who continues to identify as a Methodist even after this really painful decision was made. I emailed them the other day just to see how they were doing, and they said that things are going surprisingly well. They said that they feel like this decision really shook some people out of complacency. So they're looking on the bright side of things, and I'm really happy about that. Adam was kind enough to sit down and talk to me all about the UMC, but also to talk about their own life, which is what this episode focuses on. There is so much to learn from Adam's story. I especially love what they say about the idea of needing to pay attention to people's experiences when determining whether theology is good or bad. Like Jesus said, we can know things by their fruits. So yeah, let's jump in to this episode and listen to what Adam has to say. I'm like tucked away into my closet right now.
Yeah, I'm just in my bedroom, but I'm behind two doors. My partner and one of my friends are making me my birthday cake because it's my birthday tomorrow.
Oh my
So,
gosh, happy birthday.
yeah, thank you. I turned 26.
So Adam, I would invite you to, say hello, tell the listeners anything you think they should know about you.
All right. Well, thank you for having me, first off.
For
This is
sure.
an incredible opportunity. Oh man, this is really cool. So my name's Adam Richards. I use they, them pronouns. I am 26 years old. I am a lifelong United Methodist. And I'm hoping to go to seminary in the spring of 2020 after I finish my master's in political science. It's
So
always
you've got
busy.
a lot on your plate.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. On top
Right.
of working at a church, right?
Yes, I currently work at Chapel Hill United Methodist Church in Farmers Branch, Texas. It's a cute little church. I really like working there. Like it's really cool. And I go to church at a different church locally called Arapahoe United Methodist.
What sort of drew you to those two churches?
So I'm intimately involved in two different churches, which is exciting.
Yeah, that
But,
is.
um, so what sort of drew me to Arapahoe was, oh God, this requires a lot of background. So I guess this would be a good segue for me just kind of giving like kind of little life story-ish. Hopefully this isn't too long.
Yes, please. However long you want it to be. That's what we're
Yeah.
here for.
So, so as I mentioned, I'm like been lifelong United Methodist. The UMC has had issues with accepting LGBTQ plus individuals. So kind of growing up was an interesting experience. My parents weren't like super duper religious. I'm actually more religious than I think either of them have ever been. We kind of like went to church off and on really
Mhm.
until I was like into like early middle school, and I started getting involved at the youth group at like Custer Road United Methodist Church. It's a church local in Plano, Texas. It's got this huge youth group. It's a huge church. It's like mega churchy, but it's got like a traditional style sanctuary. It's a wild place. But they had this huge youth group there, and I got like really involved in it. Like I was just kind of like, oh man, this is actually like, you know, really cool. Like I'm actually like really like kind of jazzed about this church thing. Um, unfortunately, well, I'm not sure unfortunately is the right word, but like at the same time, I'm like kind of starting to get involved into the church is also the time I'm starting to figure out my sexuality. Gender identity stuff came a lot later, like 10 years later. So I'm kind of like figuring out my like sexuality. And this is like mid 2000s in suburban Texas to kind of give a time frame here. This
Yeah.
was just after like Amendment 2 passed, which was constitutional amendment that banned same gender marriage. So homophobia was rife,
Yeah.
as it was, and it was middle school. And that was reflected particularly among the boys in the youth group. To credit to a lot of those people as they grew up did come around. Like I'm
Yeah.
out to like a fair few of those people. But it was still a very like not great environment. So because it's like at the same time I'm like, from youth minister, like I'm getting like a lot of like great spiritual development, like really learning to love God. Like and to his credit, like his thing was very much like formed a lot of the Christianity I have today, which was like reframing from the culture warrior definition to like, how do you serve others and how do you love others? Like it really emphasizing that. But at the same time, it was like also not queerness was not something that was just talked about like in a
Yeah.
general setting outside of like sometimes he'd like take the temperature of like the youth group and was just like, just out of curiosity, like how many of you are in like favor of like gay marriage or something like that? And like almost everyone raised their hand, which was really cool.
Oh,
And I was like, oh, I feel a lot safer here.
that's good.
But yeah, it was really frustrating because the church in general was because it was not affirming, and
Hmm.
I never knew who was safe to talk to. I was effectively for a long time like forced to be closeted and only really came out to select people.
Hmm.
And that really kind of like took a toll on my faith because I'm like, anytime I like came to church, I would have to be like put up this wall and like not be able to be myself. And eventually I just kind of stopped going. Um,
Oh,
it was super draining after a while. And then this was around the time I went off to college. So it was like a kind of convenient break point because I wasn't like,
yeah.
didn't have the youth group to draw me back in anymore. But UTD has a thriving LGBTQ plus community. And I kind of was starting to get involved in that. Right about like 2013, 2014, I get like a phone call from someone who's a member of the social group there, which is now also the political activist group, who is like had basically heard me talking about like LGBTQ plus politics and stuff, and was like, hey, like, do you want to like found this like activist group with me? And I was like,
Oh,
fuck
wow.
yeah, I do. Like, that sounds great.
Yes.
Like that's what I've like kind of been wanting to do. Really, that was kind of, I didn't really kind of realize it at the time, but that was kind of like the Holy Spirit working kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because like just like first meeting of that group, like, just looking around, there's like 20 or so people, but just like feeling this overwhelming like love for them and this desire to like, work with them and like advocate with them and like lift up the marginalized basically. Like it was just
Mm.
like, oh my God, like this is what I meant to do. And that was like, okay, like this is kind of a thing. I still feel like there's something missing at this point because again, I didn't realize like this is like kind of a God thing. And I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
something missing here. And then the whole Frank Harris thing happened. Do you know about Frank Harris? Should I give a quick primer?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Give a bit of information about that.
yeah. His name is Frank Harris. I really hope it is.
Future Avery coming in just to say that Adam meant to say Frank Schaefer, not Frank Harris.
So basically, he was a United Methodist pastor. He still is a United Methodist pastor. And his son at the time wanted to get married in the Methodist Church, and his son is gay. He performed a wedding for his son. The thing is, in the Methodist Church, you are not allowed to perform same gender weddings. Like, that is
Right.
not something you can do. If anyone finds out about it, like, you have a very real chance of losing your clergy credentials. And that's what happened to him. The United Methodist judicial system ended up stripping him of his clergy credentials. And that was like, really do or die for like the whole United Methodist thing because I'm just kind of like, okay, like I know there's like progressive places in this denomination, but I'm like, I don't know of any of them that are like close to me locally. And
Mm.
also, like, it seems like this denomination like kind of actively hates me and doesn't want me to be
Oh,
there.
yeah.
And so it's just kind of like, why am I here? And so I kind of like about 6 months, I'm just kind of like really wrestling with how do I like, like work my faith into this like activism that I'm doing.
Mhm.
Like a few months later, the LGBTQ plus programs coordinator at the Gender Center at UT Dallas, Matt Johns, name dropping some great people. They're really great people.
Uh-huh.
Um, but he comes up to me and is like, he's United Methodist too. And he comes up to me and is like, hey, we're like putting on this panel discussion about, because he knew what was kind of going on with me. And I talked about the whole Frank Schaefer thing. He was like, hey, like we're putting on this panel discussion about LGBTQ plus and spirituality. And I'm like, already, I'm like, I'm interested. Like, go
Yeah.
on.
Hmm.
And he's like, also, like, there's going to be this new campus ministry group that's going to be there, and not only are they like LGBTQ plus affirming, and they're United Methodist, and I'm like, I don't care what is happening. I'm pretty sure I skipped class to go there, but I went there.
Oh, wow.
I basically go there and I like kind of give, basically everything up to this point, how I'm like really feeling with the church, how I'm like feeling like really hurt by the church. I
Hmm.
was able to just kind of like say this. And like one of the people on the officers in the group, Emily Hardwick, she like offered this like incredibly like heartfelt apology on behalf of the church and was
Hmm.
like, hey, like this was not okay. Like really sorry just on behalf of the church for the harm that's come to you, like, and just like offered this like welcoming. It's like if you ever like, want a place or like need a place to be, like we are a safe place. They can guarantee you that. And that just kind of from there, like I started going back into church, realized I had a call to ministry through like being like an officer in that LGBTQ plus group and later in the campus ministry,
Uh-huh.
which I'm still an officer of right now.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
yeah. And so like, it just kind of like, led me on the path of ordained ministry, and that's kind of where I want to go.
It can be so hard. Like, I really feel that there's always this sort of tension where you have to decide whether you're called to stay with the denomination that does some hurtful things and helping to fix from the inside, or if it's time to leave, you know? And so I'm so glad you were able to find that campus ministry group that helped you recognize some reasons to stay, you know?
Yeah, no, it's done like wonders for my faith, and like
Hmm.
we're now like really actively like involved with the LGBTQ plus community on campus. I
Hmm.
think most of our officers are LGBTQ plus. I've seen like multiple people who have like come through there who are like kind of like faith hanging on by a thread, like kind of
Yeah.
thing. Who are like like now on the path to like again, also on the path to like, ordained ministry, which is like
Yeah.
really cool. And I'm just like, and even like people who like aren't like, all about like the church things, just so they have like a safe place and they know that we're a safe place. Because we have a like space on campus. And if even if they're just curious about like Christianity, like they're a safe place to like go and ask questions and like get in touch with themselves better. And that's
Yeah.
just like really beautiful.
I wish every school had that.
Yeah, no,
Mm.
it's really cool. Like we host like like after Pride has its dinners, like they'll oftentimes like a whole group of people will come back to the space and like play games and do stuff. And it's just a really cool thing. Like I
Yeah.
could gush about that for like hours.
Yeah. It's so
um,
awesome, especially because so many people think that you can't be LGBT plus and a person of faith. Do you ever have any sort of backlash from people about this campus ministry?
we've had like one or two individuals who were very much like maybe three or four, but we've been around for a while at this point.
Mhm.
So it's not like a frequent occurrence, but occasionally you'll get someone who come up to you like at a booth who will be like super upset with
Yeah.
you. Like they just like trot out the clobber verses and
Ugh.
stuff. like first off, like what do you think this is going to accomplish? Like this is not like
Yeah.
this is not like a space for debate. Like we're
Mhm.
just trying to like I don't know, like
Mhm.
sell baked goods. Can you leave us
Yeah.
the fuck alone, please?
Yeah, and it's not like if they say Romans 1:27 or whatever at you, you're gonna go, "Oh my gosh, I had no clue that was in there. Well, gosh, I guess I can't be gay or queer or LGBT
Right,
anymore. My bad."
right. Like that's the thing
Yeah.
that gets me. The thing that gets me about all this is like, you know, there's just this implicit assumption that we know nothing about our faith. And it
Yeah.
just goes for progressive Christians in general, but like LGBTQ plus Christians especially. It's like, oh
Mhm.
no, you just don't like these people come up and they're like, oh, you don't know anything. You've like clearly just never looked at the Bible. And
Mhm.
like motherfucker, like me and like all the other like queer people I know are like, if not like super biblically literate, like better, more so than the average Joe, because
Yeah.
we need to be
Yeah.
like, and this goes especially so if you're transgender.
Mhm.
Like on top of that, like you really have to know. Which the funny thing about the whole trans stuff is like, even if you're going to take a literal reading of the Bible, like there's like no prohibitions against being trans in the
Yeah.
Bible. Like
Yeah.
there's nothing. They just think we're like super gays, like really
They
Freud.
confuse the gender and the sexuality thing.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
because that's what Freud defined it as. You know, he just like,
Mhm.
oh, like inverts and like trans
Yeah.
people are just people who are like really gay. But yeah, you have to be like really kind of on your toes about that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Like, they'll throw those clobber verses at us without realizing we probably have done more research into those verses than they have.
Yeah,
We
no,
are very
absolutely.
familiar with them.
Yeah. Being trans has like been an interesting experience. I mean, I didn't realize I was trans until like probably about this time last year.
Okay.
Um, which was an interesting development. One that was kind of a long time coming in retrospect. It's one of those instances where like I don't know if you've had this experience where like you go into therapy and you're like like kind of like quote unquote fixing other issues, and then you just kind of find more things that you haven't dealt with like
Yeah.
underneath that.
Mhm.
So like after processing a bunch of like childhood trauma from being bullied constantly, and just general family trauma from like the church, or like also my mom passed away a few years ago. Like just kind of dealing with all of that. Once I kind of got that sorted, it was just kind of like my brain was just like, oh, by the way, here's all that gender stuff you've been like pushing away like
Mhm.
for years. And I was just like, fuck, I don't want to deal with this shit
Yeah.
again.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm like, I thought I was done coming out to people. God
Yeah.
damn it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's an
Um,
eternal process.
right. Do you have any particular questions for me? Like, just general stuff. I know I've been like, I'm sorry I keep hitting my desk. I hope that's not too bad in editing. I'm very clumsy. Um,
That's okay.
uh, but do you have any particular questions for me? Like anything you want to know about? Because I feel like I've been talking a lot about.
Yeah. You have
Yeah.
covered most of, like, I have a little note card here with questions. Most of them you have answered. If you want to talk more, about family, like you mentioned, you have a partner. If you're interested in talking about any of that,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Oh God, my partner's wonderful. We've been together for almost 4.5 years at this point.
uh,
Which is just wonderful. And it's interesting because it's actually like an interfaith relationship. He's basically been
oh,
like a lifelong atheist. It's just, I mean, it's been great. Like honestly, I think it's because we have like mutual respect for each other and like our
mhm,
ideas. Like I mean, it helps that we kind of agree politically in a lot of things, obviously,
yeah,
but faith has never really been like a conflict in our relationship. I know like there's that whole unequally yoked thing. Like a friend of
yeah.
mine got run out of a campus ministry um, for which also ran out several people for being gay. Run
Oh
out of a
God.
campus ministry for dating an atheist.
Oh my
Um,
gosh. Yeah,
yeah,
and it's all because of that quote from Paul, that unevenly yoked thing. you don't feel like you have that issue in your relationship. That
No, like
yeah.
I don't like that's not like it's never been an issue. It's like it's because we
Mm,
have mutual respect for each other. Like, and he's been like,
yeah.
really like supportive of me going to seminary, which is like really
Awesome.
cool.
Yeah.
And like that's just awesome. And he actually works at the church I work at as a
Oh,
co-office
cool.
manager. Yeah, because because I couldn't like work like my usual hours this semester. Like he's taken over like some of my hours.
Oh, that's so sweet. Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
and he's really like really neat and organized, and is like better at graphic design than I am. And so
Mhm.
like things are like going running a lot smoother now that he's come along. Not gonna lie, but
Uh-huh.
not that I'm not good at my job, but like that's more his wheelhouse than mine.
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah. So you
uh,
you balance each other out with
Yeah. Yeah, no, and he's great. Really my family's been like pretty great just in general too. Like even extended family, like with the exception of my sister, which I feel comfortable saying because I don't think she'll ever fucking listen to this. I have a weird family dynamic. So like I'm like bisexual and non-binary. I
Mhm.
have supportive parents. My brother is gay. My sister is like virulently homophobic.
What do you think about sort of when it comes to family conflict? Do you have any thoughts on sort of when it when it's worth trying to like salvage a relationship when one family member is transphobic and when it's time to sort of move on, you know? Any
I
thoughts
I
on that?
I think if for me like my dad was not like affirming when I first came out to him as bisexual. Like that was a
Okay.
thing that like actually kind of upset him. And he like
Yeah.
really like did a deep dive here, probably because my mom would have killed him otherwise. My mom was a very confrontational person. And she like kind of like pushed him to be like, hey, like, that's your fucking kid. Like you gotta really work for this. And like he's been like the super duper like defender of like anyone who's like gonna fuck with me. He's like the person who's
Mhm.
like, no, like that's not gonna happen. And it was a funny kind of like occasion. We were over at my parents' house and my partner, who's also trans, my mom, who's like the saint, was like washing our clothes because we were staying over there. Because my was an awesome person, miss
Mhm.
her dearly. Um, and she's going through the laundry, and apparently what happened was, my mom finds one of his binders, and
Oh,
she's like, what's this? Like, I don't understand this article of clothing. And my dad, and again, my mom's the one who like grew up in like the more affirming environment. My dad just looks over and like, is like, oh, that's a binder. Alex probably trans. It was just really
yeah.
funny. Like, it was kind of
Mhm.
like, I was like, kind of like, thing where it's like, okay, that kind of personal growth was like, really glad I kind of like stuck things out there. But even then, I still
Yeah.
have some, like, if I'm not gonna lie, I still have some trust issues with like opening up to my dad because of those
Yeah.
early things. And that's,
Yeah.
I gotta like, that's something to like work through. Like, that's the thing that's like rough about this
Mhm.
kind of stuff is even once you've like reconciled with the person, um,
Mhm.
it's really hard to, especially someone you're previously very close to, it's really hard to get back to that same level because there's always that voice in the
For sure.
back of the head that's like, this person's not safe. Like,
Yeah.
are they going to turn on you? Are they going to go back to their old ways?
I think it's good to be honest about that, you know? Like,
No,
yeah.
and yeah, and I'm like very self like aware of it. It's been also like
Mhm.
hard to deal with like properly because um like it was easy to paper over it before my mom passed away, but after like that it kind of like I couldn't have the conversation. I still really haven't had the conversation. I'm sure it'll be fine. Like I also haven't come out to my dad as trans because I'm lazy and I just don't want to deal with answering any questions.
Yes.
Um
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know if any of your people listen to the McElroys and Bim Bam Prog.
Oh, I love them.
Um, the episode with the Dallas Live show, I was the person who asked for funny ways to come out to my dad.
Oh my
So
gosh.
Yeah.
Adam,
So
that's so funny. I remember that.
yeah.
Yeah.
I still have not, if anyone's looking for an update on that, I still have not. I've come
Mm.
out to probably millions of people before I came out to my fucking
Oh
dad.
my gosh, that's so
Um,
funny.
my plan is to find a point to like send it to him, like just the
Yeah.
episode, no context it, because it'd be funny because he'd have to be like listening to it and he's like, what the fuck is this about vaping hot dogs? Like, like,
Oh
oh
my
my,
gosh.
it would just be really funny. And
Yeah.
like, because he's a
Yeah.
very funny person too. So,
Mm.
like that, I think that would be like a good way to do it. Because like the coming
Yeah.
out process usually sucks. There's never a good way to
Yeah.
do
For me, it was a little easier because I wanted them to start using the right, like my family members to use my new name. And
it.
so the
Right.
name change was a good time to bring it up. Um, Also, this is a really random tangent. I love that your name is Adam because you might know this that Adam in Hebrew just means human. It's like the neutral word for a human being.
Yeah. It's
And so
really cool.
it's like the perfect name for a non-binary person and I love it.
Yeah, like I think that was just kind of delving into trans stuff a little bit. Like that was like something like just kind of with that like for me like that was part of like, one of the weird things about like figuring out that I was trans was like I
Mhm.
had some like the stereotypical like early stuff like you know really kind of more identifying with like the girls in my classes like but
Mhm.
not like so but not like to the level of but not to the level like the stereotypical quote unquote trans experience whatever the fuck
Mhm.
that is
Yeah.
but like but I had like and I would go swimming like I was like I would always like want to cover my chest like because it was just kind of like well like these people are doing it why am I chest open I don't want to I feel
Mhm.
weird I feel exposed like for me it was like hard to figure out because for a lot of it was I don't have that much dysphoria outside of like body hair stuff, particularly facial hair.
Mhm.
Which I just chalked up to a sensory thing due to me being autistic. I'm like, oh, that's probably why.
Oh my
Like
gosh, Adam, same. Yes. Trans autistic high five.
yeah. It's just like yeah, the process of like
Yeah.
where's my gender begin and like what's the delineation
Oh
between
my
me being
gosh.
autistic and me being
Yes,
trans?
and the sensory issues, that is so relatable. Trying to
I realized
decide why you're uncomfortable, whether it's dysphoria or sensory issues, is so hard sometimes.
right. Well, it's like and like I figured out both really. um, but like but I didn't really figure it out until I like got some more gender affirming clothing, which I really should fucking work on. I just don't like shopping, especially when you're non-binary. It's like very hard to find stuff that you're like, yes, like that's
Mhm.
me. Because a lot of things are so heavily gendered.
Yeah.
But
Well, and it can be so scary to shop in parts of the store that people don't expect you to go in.
right,
Like I've gotten to the point with because I'm on testosterone, I've gotten to the point where like I'm sort of like people cannot tell what I am. So when I'm in the guys section, they're like, why is this girl in the guys section? But now when I'm in the women's section, they want to know why a guy's in the women's section. So I can't win no matter what when shopping.
right. Yeah, and that's like the only like which also like limits my shopping opportunities because like one like buying clothes online is just a hit and miss. So there's that, and then it's just so like there's a place called like Out of the Closet in there's actually a chain. It's like an LGBTQ focused like thrift store, and I think
Ooh.
I think the profits all go to some like HIV charity thing. I don't remember what, but
Oh.
it's really so I'll shop there in the neighborhood, or I'll get stuff from clothing swaps, like because it's just
Mhm.
like it's safer. Um,
Yeah.
and even then, I'm still like really picky.
Yeah.
I'm very proud of the Ralph Lauren jacket I got for $9. That
Oh,
I didn't
nice.
realize was a Ralph Lauren jacket until I got it home. So it's my favorite piece of clothing now, the sleeveless jacket. But it's also fundamentally useless because it's a sleeveless jacket. I wore it at the Pride Parade in Dallas because I'm like, yeah, I can be gender affirming, dress up. And I was like,
Um,
it's hot as balls out here, but only my chest. Like it's hot as
oh
balls,
my
but only
gosh.
my chest. it was a weird experience, and I'm like, I don't know what to feel right now. Like,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
not sure whether I'm comfortable or I'm like dying. But which, yeah, I guess that's quintessential non-binary living in Texas experience.
Mm.
Um, one of the things, there was a church thing I really wanted to talk about. Oh, yeah. So one of the things that really got me about faith stuff was, um, like this was a hard thing to like reconcile for a long time because the mythos of like, you're only going to find God or godly things happening in groups full of Christians, right? Like
Yeah.
as someone who spent a lot of time in those kind of groups, and then but then also like spending a lot of time in like, LGBTQ plus groups, and I'm like, all the things that were said to have supposed to happen in like these Christian spaces don't happen there, but they're happening a lot in these secular spaces. And
Yes.
I'm like, that's interesting.
Yes. Oh, that
Yeah,
is so true.
one of the things was like I realized it's like, this is just probably also just general theology stuff I've picked up. It's like it's because you find God in the spaces where the marginalized gather. Like
Hmm.
it's not like about like this whole nominally Christian thing, and it's like marginalized group of people, which means of course you're gonna find God in groups of trans people.
Yeah.
Like because being trans, there's nothing wrong with it, but sometimes like the society sure goes out of its way to make it suck.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, and so you have this community, like these clothing swaps, like that's literally people clothing the naked right there. Like,
Hmm.
how can you
Hmm.
look at that and not say like, and say that's not godly? Like
Yeah.
like I don't understand how you can like look at that and not conclude that that
Yeah.
is, like the Holy Spirit at work. There's this great podcast I listen to, the Queer Theology podcast. Do you
Oh,
know
yeah.
about that? Yeah.
Yes.
And what I love about the Queer Theology podcast is like so many like this is especially a problem when it comes to like the trans stuff. It's just kind of like almost like a lot of like the easier to find resources on being LGBTQ plus and Christian are focused on explanations for the clobber verses.
Hmm.
Basically explaining like you can be like gay and Christian, like kind of
Yeah.
thing. But I'm
It's
like,
all apologetic. It's all defensive.
right, it's all defensive. And what I realized, like, partly because of the Queer Theology podcast and because of the wonderful Wesley I'm a part of,
Yeah.
is it's just like, okay, like as a trans person, like that there's very, very limited help to me because the Bible
Hmm.
doesn't talk about that aspect of my identity in that way in those verses. Like
Yeah.
that's not relevant to me. It's like, where do I see myself in this? Like, what does this have to say for me? And what when you take a holistic view of the Bible, like Queer Theology does, like the queertheology.com podcast does, you start to get it. Basically, it's like, oh, like these are like it's the whole Bible. It's not just these like little bits and pieces. It's the whole fucking thing. Like,
Yes.
you like see yourself in like these experiences of like marginalization and the examples of like LGBTQ plus people existing in the Bible.
Hmm.
Like I was like the David and Jonathan.
Yeah.
Like that's one of those
Yeah.
things that reminds me like the whole David and Jonathan thing, just as an aside. Uh Oakland, they preached a sermon on that. Just like kind of introduced the concept of
Ooh.
like, yeah, they preached a sermon on that, which I think is on their
Oh,
Facebook
that's
page.
so fun.
Yeah, it's over this summer. They like she did a whole primer on this, and she was like super nervous about like how does the congregation react. I'm like, first off, look at where you fucking are. People are gonna eat this shit up. Like at
Yeah.
that point, it didn't even matter if it was true. People would love it.
Yes. Your
But like
audience
also,
is ready for it.
but also like and like it's the truth. Like you
Hmm.
have evidence. Like
Hmm.
the wording is pretty obviously like
Yes.
romantic.
They were definitely queer.
Yeah, and I think that, but like just kind of going through that was like, that was like really cool. Like where it's just kind of like, oh, there's like queer people here, like in the Bible. Like I think like a lot of people are gonna one, it's the truth, and two, people are gonna like, they need to hear that. Like,
Yes.
and even just like beyond like even just beyond like the like explicit representation, just like understanding and being able to connect to experiences in the Bible, like the things you've experienced in like your life as a trans person, Like
Hmm.
that's like so special. And that's been like ever since coming out, like my faith has gotten stronger. The more comfortable I become with my like queerness, the more comfortable I become with my faith. And that's pretty impressive for a person who, when they told their call story to their pastor, like it's funny, but it's not. I laughed when it
Yeah.
was said too. I got done telling like the story that I told like earlier to my pastor, and she was like, "Wow, like if I had been through what you'd gone through, I don't know if I'd be a part of the church." And I was like, "Dang,
Hmm.
like that's a
Yeah.
hell of a thing for an ordained minister to say."
Yeah.
One of the things that actually kept me in Christianity, honestly, was kind of, I honestly like a lot of like, you know, people who are like atheists who are just kind of like, and there's nothing, again, nothing wrong with atheists. I'm hating an atheist, he's wonderful and great. But like, still running into like atheists who are like, super bigoted against like
Yeah.
Muslims or super bigoted against
Oh,
trans people. And I'm like, okay, like clearly like it's not the Christianity that's the problem here, not necessarily, because like people are coming to the same conclusions through a different philosophical context. So it's like it kind of gave me incentive to like work on my faith and be like, okay, clearly like I don't have to abandon this,
hmm.
but I need to find a way that this like is affirming and life giving and not whatever the fuck is happening out in the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Um, like that's why like Wesleyan theology like values experience so much is because like
Hmm.
when you run into like these kind of issues, you can be like, okay, like obviously this is bad. Obviously, like keeping like the things that the church does to like repress LGBTQ plus people leads to like youth suicides. It leads to like
Yes.
self harm. It leads to drug use, alcohol use, you name it,
Hmm.
mental health issues. Just this is just kind of one of the things that like gets me about like mainstream Christianity is um we talk about like kind of ignoring the fruits, like and I think what stops a lot of progress there is like there's this thing in fundamentalist ethics where like you know the means justifies the ends. It's this unfalsifiable system of ethics where it's like, well, God told me to do this, and this is how they get around the fruits thing. God told me to
Yeah.
do this. My child is suffering because I'm doing this, but since God told me to do it and everything God tells you to do is good, then that means this must also be good.
Yeah.
I can't bring any of the real human suffering. And I've been in all my discussions, I've been told that, and it's like that doesn't
Mm.
matter. Like you have to look at the Bible. What does that say? That's how you determine
Wow.
ethics. And it's just kind
Yeah.
of like, I'm like, but the fruits, but the
Yeah.
fucking fruits.
And it
um,
it is really frustrating that when they say that they're looking at the Bible, they're looking at very isolated bits and pieces of the Bible instead of that overarching theme that we've mentioned about like God always being on the side of oppressed people
right,
and sticking up for people who are suffering and being exploited.
right,
But I'm with you. I like that wording though, that they see the means as justifying the ends. I wouldn't have
yeah.
thought to word it that way, and that's very, very true, sadly. I'd love to hear about some of the specifics of the good fruit that you've seen in your life um, after, coming out as bisexual or starting to date your partner or coming out as trans. Because for me, it's the good fruit that like once I like came out, like started dating my partner and coming out as trans and queer, there was still at first some doubt in my mind, like, am I sure this is like God's okay with this? But the good fruit is what confirmed for me that it was what God wanted. Have you
Right.
sort of felt that?
No, and it was like a similar experience. Like that was like I had it especially when I first started, like because my partner is the first like well at the time same gender. I had some other things to figure out apparently, but like that was like the first time I'd ever like entered like a specifically like queer relationship as it were.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and that was like there was still that kind of like one I had to deal with like the nagging doubts of like as a bisexual person, and then primarily have dated women before this was like, is this real? Like I'm still having this kind of is this real like doubts.
Yeah.
Which I will as an aside, that was really fun running an LGBT group while like you know pretty like at least like cisgender appearing and like bisexual because there were some people who absolutely did not trust me, and
Yeah.
because of that, they were
Yeah.
like, "Oh, you're
That's
just like a fake gay, right?"
oh my gosh. Biphobia is so real and so crappy.
I had a really terrible experience once. Someone I knew, and this is years ago at this point. I saw someone I knew like in the student union. I said hi to them, like, "Oh, hey, what are you doing?" And they came over and like talking to me, and I was kind of explaining, I was like, kind of like they like dumped like a whole bunch of like, like really kind of like bad stuff that was happening on like, I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry," like, no. It came up that I was like bisexual at some point, and
Hmm.
like, 'cause I think she was talking about dating, and she was like, "Oh, I don't trust bisexuals," and I'm like, "You just
No.
you just told me your whole fucking personal history. What do you mean you don't trust bisexuals?" This was a trans person too. Like on
Yeah.
top of that,
Oh
very
man.
much.
Hopefully she's unpacked some of that and gotten better.
I really fucking hope so. But going back to what I was saying, so there's this bisexuality thing, like trying to carve in terms of that, and then also like the Christianity thing. Like both of these things are
Mm,
causing nagging doubts in my head, and
yeah.
like that's like, and both of those are like for me like really deep down like parts of my identity, where it's just kind of like, but they're like both put in doubt, where it's just kind
Yeah.
of like, and I feel like I'm like constantly having to justify myself on like two fronts. Now,
Hmm.
obviously, like over time, that like got better because I'm like I have the experience, I have like the courage, I have the familiarity with what I'm experiencing. I just have more knowledge, one from getting older and really from like kind of like doing more deep dives into this stuff. But like
Hmm.
I really should have, in an ideal world, not have had to worry about any of this, not have had to justify any of it because it should just be. Like
Yep.
I shouldn't have to like justify like my bisexuality by having dated multiple genders to be taken seriously as the leader of an LGBT plus group. I shouldn't
Hmm.
have to like, have like, cover to cover knowledge of the Bible to be queer and Christian because that's not the standard
Hmm.
for most people. Like most people don't know shit,
Amen.
honestly.
Yes.
I wouldn't doubt their
Yeah.
faith, but most people don't know shit.
Yeah. We're definitely held up to such higher standards.
Right. Like, and
Yeah.
I think, and especially like, again, that's like a doubly so when you're trans, like, because it's just like, and like, even then, it's just kind of like, I don't even know how to like when they like get the most like thing closest thing to a clobber verse was like, there was like one verse or something about like men should not wear women's clothing, which that's just
Yeah.
also arbitrarily defined anyways, so it doesn't really
Yeah.
matter.
Yeah. That's
And I'm
very
like,
culturally contextual what counts as women's and men's clothing.
look, like once like women started wearing pants and like really started culturally being acceptable, like we really should have just like that should have just
Yeah.
fallen by the wayside at that point. And it's just like you
Mhm.
can't just bring that up in 2019 and expect to be taken seriously.
If
Yes.
you're a trans man and you're wearing men's clothes, you're good.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
like you're a
Like,
man wearing men's clothes. Boom, you did it. Yeah.
well, honestly, there's a possibly interesting like nugget there where it's just kind of like we're there's the consequences of sin, like
Yeah.
and talking about like what it does to a person, and like what happens, like it causes the people around you when you sin, but also like like that kind of verse, you could like come up with an interpretation of that kind of verse where it's just kind of like, yeah, it would be like you know, quote unquote sinful to do this because wearing clothes that don't affirm my gender identity causes me harm. Like,
Yes.
and I'm not
Yeah.
being honest with myself. And,
Hmm.
then the church is forcing people to live in sin, basically, um,
Yeah.
which is like a huge indictment of the church.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, this has been the wonderfully cathartic conversation.
Yeah. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
It's
Um,
been it's been so fun. And I just looked at how long we've been talking for like 2 hours, and my cat has woken up from her nap and is trying to get my attention. She's like, "Human, why have you been in the closet this long? Please come out and feed me."
that's just also like an LGBT plus mood right there is why have you been in the closet so long?
Get out already. But it's
But
comfortable in here, and I have I have soft blankets in here.
yeah, it's
Mm.
like that's like the whole thing that like go back to the Bim Bam thing. It's like, why are you still here? Like it's just like it's comfy and I don't want to deal with it. Um,
Yeah,
which
it takes so much energy to come out.
right. Yeah, and you have to do it constantly. Especially if
Mm-hmm.
you're someone like who's trans and is
Yeah.
not like quote unquote like obviously trans is the best way
Yeah.
I can come to phrase it. Where it's just kind of
Yeah.
like, I most of the time I look like a cis dude, which is just kind
Yeah.
of like, and people like, I know Adam is meant to be gender neutral, but a lot of people like interpret it as man, and so it's just kind
Yeah.
of like it's a very masculine name in our
Yeah.
culture, and so people just look at me and they're like, man, and it's just like, no, not
Mm-hmm.
man, not
Yeah.
how to do. I'm just wearing this
Well,
because gender affirming clothes are hard to find, and I'm autistic, and these are comfortable.
yeah. Mood.
You were
That's such a
saying?
mood. And
Yeah.
like when you're non-binary, like people expect you to dress like always like their idea of what like neutral is, which in our society, neutral is like masculine and neutral are like the same because of sexism. And so I'm sure that
Right.
doesn't help. Yeah, like personally, like I like dressing feminine sometimes, and then people are like, "Oh, so you are a girl?" I'm just like, "No, that's not how this works."
How it works.
And so my last question to sort of wrap up is if you have any last, little words of wisdom for trans people of faith.
I think, oh, for me, it's just, this sounds so cliche, but it's so true. Apply this as you will, especially outside of the Abrahamic faiths. Is that, God loves you and you're doing nothing wrong. Like,
Mhm.
and just reminding yourself of that. It may not work at first because,
Mhm.
those societal messages are very strong, even when you're in affirming places, but
Yeah.
it's the truth. And it that's what matters. And, and that will get you through a whole heck of a lot.
Yeah.
Well, thank you
Yeah.
for having me. This has been wonderful.
Yeah. This has been great. Thank you for reaching out. That's a wrap on another episode of Blessed Are the Binary Breakers. Next episode should be out in 2 weeks. In the meantime, go break some binaries and be a blessing to the world with your life.